Yeah, for me, there's a question of um, like responsibility. Like
Mhm,
if you break responsibility down, it
mhm,
becomes responsibility.
mhm,
So given that I'm lucky to um, like be surrounded by people that aren't afraid to look at the like hard truths of this world and kind of grew up with them, um, with an awareness of them, of climate change and terrible economy, and just the all of the many broken systems. It's like growing now that I have an awareness of all of these issues. What's my responsibility um, to respond to them in a good way? And um, and like if I'm holding that as a question, what does my life look like then? Um, how am I living my life as if it's an answer to
mhm.
that question?
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This episode, we have conscious alternative living pioneer, counselor, and facilitator Rebecca Young Allen introduces us to her remarkably clear and empowered daughters, Grace and Erica Martenson.
All right. Okay. I noticed that I'm kind of getting rapid fire here. I've got a little anxiousness going on. I'm excited about this call today. I'm excited about this particular episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I have some very special guests. Had the uh, privilege of speaking with Becca then Martenson, now Young Allen, Becca Young Allen. And now today, for my first time, I have the privilege of speaking with not only Becca, but her daughters, Grace and Erica. And it's an extraordinary time as we begin. We're well into 2020 now. And, one of the most remarkable years of my life already, and we're not even halfway through it. I can say that 2019, well, is just a non-stop parade, which 2018 was as well, of extraordinary events on whatever end of the spectrum you'd want to describe it. There was life-alteringly transformational and inspiring events, and of course there were many, many disasters and fires and floods, and on the list goes, not to mention the political melee that's been going on. And what I'm particularly excited about today in having this conversation is, in my experience, we've crossed a threshold. That certainly is how it shows up for me. Is it's really time to speak up, and for some people that's a very different thing. We seem to have a collective, almost silence going on. There's certainly plenty of noise, and there's plenty of arguing, and there's plenty of polarized politics to fill the air. But in terms of what matters most in people's lives, it seems like there's an extraordinary stillness it really is disturbing to me, and it's really an important part of this body of work that is included with the poetry of predicament, to find people who have their voices, and they have something to say, and they're clear about what matters most to them in the face of these extraordinary times. So to all three of you, thank you so much for spending some time sharing some of those, what matters most to you, and sharing your voices. And why don't I just stop there and see if one of you would just be willing to start and introduce yourself a little bit, and we can take it from wherever we end up at the end of the three of you just presencing yourself a bit and introducing yourself.
I'll start. I'm Becca, and I'm a proud mama of these wonderful women here at my side, and yeah, I'm grateful to have been thinking about the cascade of predicaments that we're in right now for over 15 years, and having taken many, many steps in the life of our family to respond to those events in a way that feels good in my heart. And so, yeah, that's enough for me.
And Becca, would you include what we just were talking about before we hit the record button, about the family history that includes your now ex?
Yes.
And you know, we'll get into some of the extraordinary choices that you both have made, and then created this family, and we'll get into that story. But would you just put that into context for us with Chris?
Yeah, certainly, certainly. So, in my first marriage for 33 years with Chris Martenson, who has made really devoted his second half of his adult life to this work around resilience and awareness and preparing for an unknown future. And as a result of that work, we made large changes in our family and moved from one context to another. And we moved from a corporate context to a rural, work at home, homeschooling, no TV, grow your own food, build community. Just a very, very different context than we were in before. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for Chris's work and how that perspective really directed us to make changes that have been 100%, in my opinion, you can ask my daughters, but in my opinion, for the better, in service to all of us.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll go next. Yeah, so I kind of, grew up in a family that made some radical choices. So of course, as a kid, I didn't know it was a radical choice at the time. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, like doesn't everybody's family have a big garden and chickens? And I think it was absolutely, the choices that Mom, you and Dad made absolutely shaped who I am as an adult, and shaped my values, and shaped the things that are important to me and that I now choose to like pour my time and energy into. So yeah, I'm so grateful. And now of course hindsight is 2020. I'm like, thank God you did that. Holy moly, thank God you made that really big, scary choice. So
Yeah, thank you.
I would say what really shaped the way I grew up was being able to walk 10 minutes through the woods to a nature program, and just be able to spend all day learning in a different way. And from that nature connection came more community and just different perspectives and knowledge of different ways to learn and how to work, and all these beautiful things sprang from that. And yeah, I'm glad my parents made the decision to send me there.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. Well, I actually made some kind of bold assertions at the beginning of this podcast episode, and I really don't want to assume that that any of the three of you see the world somehow identically to me. I'd actually be really curious if each of you would take a few moments to speak about what gets your attention these days. What are some of the bigger concerns that you have looking out through your eyes? Yeah, I would just appreciate that, because I think I'd be making a big mistake if I just assumed we're all on the same page without spending a little time there.
Sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, so I'd say some of the things that claim most of my attention these days revolve around I'll use the umbrella of resilience, and that there's a lot of things that fall under that category. So for me, that looks like resilience in my relationships. So there's a large focus in my life around community and like fostering and nurturing the relationships, specifically with the people that are in my area and that are local to me and who I interact with every day. So there's a lot of tending of those relationships through gatherings and through one-on-one personal relationships and through my women's group. And so there's kind of a lot of different ways that plays out in my life. But so community is a major focus for me. And then another kind of big category for me is I'll use the term rewilding. That's a somewhat new term to me that seems like it fits with my life. And and building and remembering really what it's like to have deep relationship with the land. And so that looks for me like, what is it? Like, how do I harvest food from the land? How do I make medicine from the land? Lately, I've been extremely passionate about weaving baskets from local natural materials. What's the, who are the beings that live on this land? Who are the animals who are here? Just it's kind of this never-ending domino effect of curiosity that I'm following right now. So, but yeah, I think rewilding kind of encapsulates that for me. Of how do I return to the part of me, that innate part of me that knows how to be in deep relationship with the place that I'm living in. And there's like so much more concerns. I mean, God. Yeah, it's hard
to pick.
Yeah, it's hard to pick. It really does feel like it's everywhere you look. I mean, God, every single like major system in this modern world is harmful, is painful to look at is like needs preferably immediate addressing and rectifying. And so for me, that looked like I'm doing that on a small scale, like just in my individual life through, okay, how do I create resilient food systems, and how do I learn to make my own medicine? And, but so those focuses of mine are really my way of addressing those like really large scale problems. And so, God, yeah. It feels like it's hard to choose, it's hard to name just a few. What do you?
I'm just curious how you're holding it. How about you, Grace?
For me, just for concerns, I would say just the instability that's happening right now, and what that looks like for my future and my generation's future. And I think I've been raised in a way where, like, I know there's no guarantees for my future, and so I think that's allowed me to become more adaptable to it. And so in times of chaos like we're having right now, I feel more stable because of that. And that's where the community comes in, and the nature connection, and just these different ways of living that are more conducive to times of chaos and disorder and unknowns, which I think we're really in the midst of right now. That's sort of where I'm at right now, is just gratitude for all that I have and all that I've been given, and the way that I can live my life, and not have any too big personal concerns, but more concerns for my friends and loved ones who don't have the same stability and chaos that I do.
Yeah, we're extremely well resourced in that way.
Yeah.
In having parents that showed us what it looks like to adapt their lifestyle to a troubled world. I think we really learned about that from you guys.
And I'm really grateful that we were never raised with blinders on, I would say.
Well, I was
youngest. But I don't know, I never felt like these dark truths were hidden from me, and like you guys were really open and sharing hardships that were happening and going on, and I think that's made me better prepared for hardships that are happening in my adult life as well.
It's cool hearing them talk about this. I don't think I would hear them talk about this in this way without this podcast, so that's cool. Let's see, for myself, I'd say from the highest vantage point, what I'm holding is an awareness that we're in a great dying, that we're in a great die-off on the planet, and that we're in a great dying of form, and that great death looks like in a million different ways across the planet right now. And I think that Corona is, one of the latest versions of that great death. I think it's necessary. I think that it's a part of the cycle of change that we're in right now, and the larger arc of change. And I'm looking on more of a 1,000-year timeline right now. So it's in the middle of where we are right now. It feels, really scary and chaotic and all of these things. But I feel like it's really in service to a rebirthing that's happening simultaneously amidst the dying. And the rebirthing is what I'm hearing in my daughters right now and speak to in terms of remembering old new ways to be alive and be connected and be in relationship. And yeah, one of my primary concerns right now in terms of the current scare in terms of the coronavirus is that the medicine for this this being that's entering our lives is isolation and separation. And to me, that's just sort of the pinnacle of where we are right now. Like, yes, more isolation and more separation, even though that is really what people are suffering from already and at epidemic levels. So what I'm holding is how can we respond to such situations in fresh new ways that don't feed the old story and the old paradigms that got us here.
Thank you. Along that track, I'm curious, especially for Grace and Erica. I'm curious if you, when you look out at the people your age around the world, but particularly in the USA. And you were talking just a few moments ago about how you're well resourced and you have these alternative and far more transparent and far more nurturing. These are the words I was hearing, but I know you didn't use necessarily exactly those words. But you had an extraordinary growing up, and you for some years now have been immersed in a different environment with different priorities. And you seem to have adopted some of those and then made them your own in your own unique ways. I'm curious if when you look out at the world, again, at the average person your age and what they had instead, what we call normal in our culture, what are some of the pieces that, again, get your attention, like make you concerned? That piece doesn't seem to help much. Ooh, no, but that piece actually does seem to help. Is that making sense? I want to leave it kind of open for whatever elements you might be talking about. Just to be really straight with y'all, I'm really wanting to head eventually towards social media and everything like, smartphones and the incredible suck on our attention collectively. And I have my own opinions and so on about that, but I'm so very curious what your reality is and what you see and what shows up as actually something like a tool or something useful and what seems like it might not be so good.
I kind of had this experience because I grew up kind of in this bubble around other kids who were growing up with kind of similar resources as far as the people around them goes, and around just like knowing that there are other things that they can prioritize in their lives. So it was kind of a like culture shock for me when I got out of that bubble and like moved away and traveled and started to talk to people and just got more of a feel for where other young people are. And I think I think that there is just a real, there's like this lack of meaning. There's this lack of meaning in the world. And I think that kind of ties into where I think you're wanting to head with this, with the social media, but that doesn't seem to help. The social media thing does not seem to help with the lack of meaning. And
do you remember this experience that I was talking about when you went down and you talked?
I do. I'm not sure where you're going with it.
I just remember when you were sitting with the children in that school, the high schoolers in that school, in circle, and what it was like to open up space for people to like really share and feel like for real, beyond the social media, everything's fine. And just the contrast to what you see in your life and your relationships in terms of familiarity with that material. And then the adult who couldn't handle it.
Right. Yeah, so my mom's referring to a time I went with a friend who was leading a workshop down at a high school. And this is literally my first time being inside of a high school. So it was,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a new experience for me. And you're right. Yeah, that was my first time interacting with like a large group of high schoolers. And so we covered a lot of material, but the real focus was on listening and what does it look like if we're like really deeply listening to one another. And where we were asking these kids, like, where in your life do you feel or not feel like you have space to be like really heard and listened to. And so we kind of broke into these small groups, and it was both beautiful and like heart-wrenching to hear what these kids had to say, and to hear the kind of vacuum that was in their lives, this real lack of people within their peers, and then also within the adults in their lives, of just like, wow, I really got this sense like you really feel like you don't have anybody. And it was really hard. And these kids were, I mean, like, God bless them, so brave and so vulnerable. And I remember actually at one point there was like a teacher chaperone in my group who was with the kids, and she started to get really uncomfortable. And at one point just excused herself and went to do something else, because she was like visibly, this was a novel experience for her, like having a space, a container created for like real, vulnerable, authentic sharing. And so, thank you, Mom. That is a good example. That the contrast of that to my life. I work with teenagers and I work with kids. I'm an outdoor educator, and so these kids are growing up in a context that's really similar to the one that I grew up in. And I came home with just this new appreciation and gratitude for this like little subculture that's blossoming here, that really fosters that type of like real authentic connection between people. And that now I see these kids who are growing up in it just stepping into in such a like natural, graceful way. I mean, my work brings me to tears regularly because it's just so beautiful. So that's like, start with that.
Thank you.
I can't really speak to my generation in the wider US because I just haven't explored the US very much. But in our community and in my friend group, I think everyone has just an amazing capacity to talk about difficult things. I can't think of a single time where I've like brought up a conversation with my friends and they've been uncomfortable with it. I got the opportunity to go to Europe, so I can speak a little bit more to Europe. And when I was over there, I was working with this family in England where they had a little 5-year-old who just had the most extraordinary capacity to hold all this darkness that was there essentially. And so, yeah, I think our generation has the capacity to hold this and to step up to what needs to happen. I think a lot of people don't give my generation room to do that, or yeah, I think there's blocks to that happening. I don't know how to say this. Yeah, I think like social media could be one of those blocks, stopping people from reaching a different potential, essentially. I can't personally speak to social media. I've never had it, but I think I can see the consumption that goes into social media and draws attention away from other things.
Yeah, like my sense of it is that we were incredibly lucky to be given kind of like a North Star in our lives of like, what is it? Here's what it could look like for a life to be created that revolves around meaning and love and real relationships and connection to place. And so I think that's why our lives are taking kind of a different form or taking a different track than most. And that's why like it's really like I guess it's really heartbreaking to look out into the broader culture and see what's like what my generation is being told is important. And I mean, you know, it's the cultural story, the many cultural stories that yeah, if you get the car, or if you get the house, or if you go to college, or if you know, fill in the blank, if you get this, then you'll be happy and then your life will have meaning. And I think we were really lucky to be given a different story than just the consumer model for how one could create a like happy and rich and full life.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you all. I think it was Grace that just a couple of moments ago said something about the calling. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it sparked me to be curious. If you were to put into words what seems to be the calling of these times, what would you say? What is the calling? What's calling to you in these times?
I think what's calling to me is a lot about what Erica spoke about earlier, which is the community and resilience, and creating that for yourself and for others if you can. And I also think it's important for everyone to have their own calling, so we're not doing it all the same, so that there's diversity in that. I don't want everyone to be doing everything one particular way. I don't think that's healthy. But yeah, for me, right now it's how can I set up my life in a way that I can have enough stability that I can give it to others as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me it's there's a question of like responsibility. Like if you break responsibility down, it becomes responsibility. So given that I I'm lucky to like be surrounded by people that aren't afraid to look at the like hard truths of this world, and kind of grew up with them, with an awareness of them, of climate change and terrible economy, and just all of the many broken systems. It's like growing now that I have an awareness of all of these issues. What's my responsibility to respond to them in a good way, and like if I'm holding that as a question, what does my life look like then? How am I living my life as if it's an answer to that question?
Beautiful. Becca, you got anything on that?
Well, I think the calling of this time is really the same as the calling for all time, for each of us, which is to connect into the depths of who we are, to know our gifts and bring them forth into the world in a way that is in service to our own self and other, in whatever form that takes. And I think one of the real problems that comes as a result of the generation that's being raised right now, being fed the story that consumption equals meaning, is that it has narrowed so significantly the scope of the gifts that are deemed worthy to be brought forth into the world. It has created a very small box and a very narrow spectrum of what is, deemed worthy. And that's a problem, because we need every single one of us to be living our gifts in the fullest capacity possible. And in order for that to happen, we need to be able to invite them from an early age on. And I don't believe that's happening really in any kind of way right now. So, I think the calling is to live our gifts and be in service to the earth.
Got it. I'm curious if any of the three of you have any particular characters or figures. I mean people, but it doesn't have to be limited to people. Either alive now, or dead now, or characters that have never been officially alive, that particularly inspire you.
Yes, there's many.
Who's gonna go first?
I mean, I just have so many names like flashing to mind right now. It feels like there's too many to name, so I'll just kind of lump them all under the category of my nature instructors and mentors growing up, who have taught me since I was a child about the skills and ways of approach to nature that just like completely shaped who I am today. So I'll just kind of put them all into that category, and there's many that fit there. And then there's so many authors and speakers and teachers. I'll just like rattle off some names that have been really impactful for me. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with a lot of them. Charles Eisenstein, Stephen Jenkinson, Martine Prechtel, Robin Wall Kimmerer. I mean, like there's so many people who are responding to that calling in their own unique ways, and that have like hugely impacted me in my way of thinking and my way of living. I'll pause there.
I think a lot of my inspirations are close to home. The people who have raised me, and that includes my parents, but that also
Hey, mom and dad.
Yeah.
Whatever.
But I don't think I was just raised by my parents. I think I was raised by a great many people, who all took different facets of my learning. And I think those people are my biggest inspirations. I'm also really called by people who work with myth. So Joseph Campbell, Stephen Jenkinson, Martin Shaw. Yep. So those are my inspirations right now.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
What I'm feeling right now is who I'll refer to as the grandmothers to the beginning of time. That great lineage of elders behind us, ancestors now, who have lived and responded to life and earth in so many changing times. We're in this one now, and it's a doozy, but we've been through many before. And rather than like through specific words or names right now, I just feel that whole lineage that stretches behind me and in front of me as well, of the grandmothers.
Thank you. Thank you. I get a sense that this precious envelope of time together is starting to draw to a close, and I'd like to, more than anything, ask all three of you to just be looking at what a kind of a closing and completing communication might look and feel like for each of you individually. And a lot of times in the podcast part of the framing of this conversation, I often will ask, so because I speak with people like yourself who are so well resourced, as Erica put it earlier, you all are extraordinarily resourced and staged in this world to presence yourselves in an extraordinary way. If you were looking across a bridge to people who were not so lucky, they're just beginning to see that there's another way to be. They're just getting their eyes above water, just starting to get a sense of maybe it doesn't have to be this way. And I'm curious if there's anything you might share, being a few steps ahead, perhaps, one way to look at it, and cross that bridge to a different way of being. Is there any sort of sharing that you might do, encouraging you might do? Is there any way that you would be comfortable inviting them toward those steps across that bridge, if that's where they're wanting to head, through your sharing, through some encouragement? I don't know if that's clear. Is that Is that an okay place to start? And please feel free to have this kind of wrapping up part of the conversation go in the way that you want it to go, each of you. So just looking to continue on the thread, the beautiful thread that you've all shared so far.
They're both nodding to me, so that means I'm going to begin.
You go, Mom.
All right, so I think your question is really beautiful. So I will speak to it. I'm speaking to the many who have not yet remembered the depths of what it means to be human. And speaking to the many who have not yet remembered what it means to be connected to the earth. For the many who have not yet remembered what it means to be connected to the humans and to community and to the deepest self. My message is just that the awakening is right in here. And we have a great opportunity during times of hardship, during times of struggle, when our cages are rattled significantly, as they are rattled right now, to look within. And honestly, I really don't think that as I call to you across the bridge, the message is really one of healing, because the great distortion that is at play on the planet right now is terribly, terribly traumatic. Terribly traumatic. The destruction that humans are causing and the destruction that humans are experiencing, it is all part of a one whole, and it's terribly traumatic for everyone, no matter where they are. And so I believe that healing is really the path to that remembering. And so my invitation is one to follow that path of healing wherever it leads. Goes up.
That would be Erica.
All right. I'll take a stab at it. Yeah, so like if I'm piggybacking on that, my question is like, so what does remembering look like? What does healing look like? And so the first thing that comes up for me is just the question of like what brings you joy? I'm speaking to the people across the, like, what actually brings you joy? What does joy feel like in your body? Do you feel joy making things with your hands, or when you're going for a run, or when you're playing with your grandkids, or but just really like paying attention to that and following that thread of joy. Yeah, and then this just popped to mind, and I'll try it out. But an elder of mine once told me, if you watch the sunrise every morning and say hi to the moon every night, he's like, your life will change dramatically. And I've been practicing that for some time now, and I can attest to it. So I would recommend doing that to the people across the bridge.
Nice. Love it.
I think I'm gonna go with Erica's thread of remembering, and what that means to you is gonna be different than what it means to other people. And a part of what that is for me is intuition, and is following my intuition. And it doesn't always work out, but I always learn a lot more from following my intuition than from disregarding it and putting it to the side. and yeah, trusting that remembrance and seeing where it takes you.
Beautiful. Whew. I guess Becca can attest, having been on a couple of calls with me, I tend to get moved in times like this, and I feel like the words I might come up with are inadequate for my my thanks to you three, and for my deep respect and honoring of your presence, both individually and together. It's extraordinary to be with you. And I thank you all for taking this time, so generously sharing of yourselves. This is for me far more than some conversation, some podcast. There is such an exchange, such a generous exchange in this presence, in this moment, in this time we've spent together. I feel nourished by having spent this time with you. I'm really, I'm at a loss for words, and so I say thank you.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you for your beautiful emotions. It's beautiful. Thank you for being a man who's willing to cry. That's a really important new seed that we need to have replanted. Thank you for that remembering.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.